We are blessed to have several baptisms happening this weekend. We had one yesterday for little Salvador Rogers, born just last Monday. Right before this Mass, little Penelope Boyne was baptized. And then right after this Mass, Romulus Marquez will be baptized. So always a joyous occasion in the life of the parish, even in the middle of Lent, right? Baptisms, especially of infants, continue. And then we have our wonderful group of OCIA candidates and catechumens, 94 in total, preparing for the Easter sacraments, now just 5 weeks away. Baptisms, confirmations, and First Holy Communions. Well, it's a wonderful time to be here. Just this past week, just next door at Holy Family Classical School, in our high school, our students were studying rhetoric. The idea that when one makes an argument, one wants to make a persuasive argument, whether in writing or in speech. And specifically, they were studying two texts. One was the 1963 Martin Luther King letter from a Birmingham jail. The other was a speech given in June of 1987 by then President Ronald Reagan. The famous speech was given at the Brandenburg Gate in Germany, that dividing line between free and not free, between communism and democracy. And in June of 1987, Ronald Reagan goes to the Brandenburg Gate and he utters these famous words. He says directly to then the leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, he says, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Some of you will remember it. Our high school students weren't alive at the time, but they got to read through this text of President Reagan's speech. I think it's interesting when we study history to think about, what if certain events didn't take place? What if President Reagan never goes to Berlin, never makes that speech, or leaves that line out, a line that galvanized people in Europe and across the world to push back against their communist dictators? What if he never says it? What does the world look like today? Is the Soviet Union still around? Does the war between Russia and Ukraine ever take place? Right? The world would look differently if Reagan never said those words. We can think about that when we talk about history. What if this didn't happen? What would the world look like? Well, I like to think about that when I think about stories like today in the gospel. The Gospel of Luke tells us that Peter, James, and John go up on the mountain with Jesus Christ. And what they see is something extraordinary. We're told that Jesus is transfigured before them. He becomes dazzling white. Peter, James, and John get a little glimpse of the resurrection. Peter, James, and John get a little glimpse of what heaven is going to be like. And so, who can blame them when Peter exclaims, "Lord, it is good that we are here"? If that happened to you, you'd say the same thing. "Lord, it is good that we are here." And then the next thing they do is they say, "Let's build 3 tents, Lord, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." As if to say, "Lord, it's so good, we want to stay right here up on this mountain." What would church history look like if Peter, James, and John never came down from the mountain? What if they just stayed? Well, church history would look a little different. We probably wouldn't really know a lot about Peter or James or John. Who would have led the early church as St. Peter did as our first pope? Peter would not have become a martyr, gone to his death to inspire that first generations of Christians to fight on. James the Greater would not have died a martyr's death, the first of the apostles to be killed. He would not have inspired that first generation of Christians by his own death to continue on, to fight for something bigger than themselves. The Apostle John, if he had stayed up on that mountain, he would not have been at the foot of the cross. Who would have written the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation? We wouldn't blame Peter, James, and John for staying up on the mountain, but thanks be to God that they came down. Peter, James, and John knew that the reality of the world awaited them down at the bottom of the mountain. Perhaps in your life you've had some religious experience. Maybe you've been on a particular retreat that just really moved you. Maybe you've been to Mass and the music, the readings, the homily, the prayers of the Mass, they just move you. You come away thinking, this is so good. And there's a tendency, there can be a temptation in our lives to want to stay right there, to not leave, to not go back down the mountain. I love Sundays here at Holy Family. Every Sunday we come, tons of people, visitors from all over the world, our beautiful candidates and catechumens, right? People who are hungry for the faith. We hear these beautiful readings, the beautiful prayers, the beautiful music, and all that takes place in this beautiful place. There are times on Sundays when I think, I don't really want it to be Monday. I don't want to go back down the mountain. Can we just stay here? Can we just have a 10 o'clock Mass all the time? Because it's good. But if we're a serious Christian people, which I hope that we are, we cannot stay here. The Sunday Mass is beautiful, and it ought to be. When we receive Holy Communion, right? That ought to be, and I hope that it is for you, a major high point of your week. To come to this place, to receive Holy Communion, to become a living, breathing, walking tabernacle of our Lord Jesus Christ. The temptation would be to just stay. Lord, it is good that we are here. But we are not meant to be here. If we take seriously the gospel, if we take seriously Jesus' call to evangelize, to go out into the world and to share the good news, then we cannot stay here. We have to go out those doors and we have to preach the good news, and we have to do it with our lives and with our words. Peter, James, and John, Lord, it is good that we are here. But what if they never came down from that mountain? What a tragedy it would be. So my friends, we have a choice today. You can stay here after Mass. We're eventually going to kick you out at some point. We're going to lock the doors. We're going to send you out, but you can stay. Maybe stay for a few minutes after Mass. That's a good thing, to give thanks to God for the gift of the Eucharist, the gift of the Mass. But eventually we have to leave. And that's not a bad thing. Because out there is a world desperately in need of what we are doing in here. Out there is a culture, out there is a world that desperately needs to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. And what is that good news? That Jesus came, that he died, and that he rose from the dead. And he calls you and I into a discipleship way of life, to be his disciples, to follow him closely with our whole lives. That's a message that the world needs to hear. And they're not going to hear it if you and I stay here. So thanks be to God for those mountaintop experiences. Thanks be to God that Peter, James, and John got to experience what they did. They got a little glimpse of the resurrection, a little glimpse of what heaven is going to be like. But I'll also say that you and I get a very similar experience every single time we walk through these doors for Holy Mass. Because what happens at every Mass is that Jesus Christ himself becomes present once again. He shows himself to us in the Eucharist, and he gives himself to us as food. What a beautiful gift. What a little glimpse of heaven. What a little glimpse of the resurrection that you and I get to share in and then take it out into the world to share the good news. Thanks be to God for mountaintop experiences. Thanks be to God that Jesus Christ comes into our life as he does. But it's your job and mine to walk out these doors and to share the gift of the Eucharist, to share the good news of Christ and his church with everyone that we meet. We must come down the mountain. We must go out into the world to preach Jesus Christ risen from the dead.